So I got a very nice question in my feed recently on how do we see the international relations objectively, and if we have to rationalize things from the perspective of a particular country, how can we do that? Like, for example, Iran is doing some particular things, or China is eyeing to take over Taiwan or expanding its presence in South China Sea. There must be some rationale behind the people there and even the citizens in that particular country by which they are able to carry on these operations and justify to themselves and even to their citizens. That's where the idea of objectivity comes around. For example, if we take the case of Iran and Israel, when the issue of nuclear experiments being conducted for the purpose of not just research or maybe for the weaponry started to came alight to the world, the response by Israel and the US counterpart was on bombing the bases of Iran. And we saw how at the end USA sent its bomber planes in the airspace of Iran and went up to bomb the nuclear bases of Iran. So if we have to now see this from the angle of Iran, we have to think like an Iranian citizen here. For this, being an Indian, we can easily relate to this situation here. In the 1998, when India tested its own nuclear capacity in the Pokhran, what would your reaction would have been if in case USA would have come into the airspace of India, bombed the Pokhran and just went ahead? Every one of us would be way angry on what USA would have done. Our anger would be boiling up, and we would have expected our representatives to give a good enough counter back to what USA did. So now if we translate the same thing which happened in the case of Iran, Iran at its own end had every right to counteract against the violation of their sovereignty. I'm not saying here whether the ulterior motives behind the nuclear proliferation by Iran, supposedly as claimed by the US and Israel, or the incidence of radical elements in Iran can justify what they are doing. But if we see from the angle of sovereignty and if we see from the perspective of Iranians, in that sense, their action of trying to counter Israel could be seen justified. Now if we take the example of China, China has faced humiliation at the hands of the colonial powers in the era of 1900s, when the Opium War came along, or when the Japanese invaded China, the famous incident of the Nanking rape which took place in China. So Chinese have been teaching their students and imbibing within them that they have had faced humiliation in the past, and if they have the power and they have the capacity in the future turns, they would like to capitalize on it and get back as a revenge against all the humiliation. And that's what we see. The expansion in South China Sea, the attempts of bullying on Philippines in the South China Sea, and in general the way it's expanding. So that's how countries justify at their end. Like, see, hey, we had a particular thing going on against us. So in order to be at peace, in order to satisfy our own national citizens, to be in sync with our idea of sovereignty, we had to take an action. But is this claim justified? Is this objectivity justified in the sense that wars can be waged? Like what Hitler did against the Jews. So can Israel today come up and stand and say that, say, hey, the Germans went against us, they humiliated us, they killed our brothers, so we should also start a war against the Germans? An eye for an eye would make the world blind. So yeah, in that sense, things wouldn't be justified. And that's where the idea of sitting on the negotiation table comes about. At the end of the day, every other single country has to represent its points and its stake to its citizens. And if the era of confrontation, the era of humiliation keeps on going, one or the other country is going to bring up a reason to justify the claims. But that's not how it can be a sustainable way for the world to progress. for a general peace, the chauvinistic or the extreme nationalism which countries often portray would eventually end up becoming more and more worse. With the era of today, with the nuclear powers having so much capability, if any large-scale confrontation comes about, God forbid, the stakes might be too much high, which happened during the time of the Hiroshima case. There's an interesting fact that the nuclear bomb that was used in the Hiroshima is alleged nothing compared to the weakest nuclear bomb that we have of the today times. So yeah, any incident of the nuclear bomb being once again used would be against for the whole world. So owing to the fact that yes, nationalism calls for protecting our sovereignty, acting against the nations that are going against us, but in the long run, the negotiations, if are not open, would just lead to escalation. And that's where the idea of, unfortunately, despite the fact that yes, UN has been losing its say, but the idea of multilateral organizations need to be remained alive. Because if there are lesser and lesser number of summits or institutions where people can talk on a common ground, it's going to be an issue for the rest of the world. So a good enough solution can be, yes, we should have more and more negotiations against each other. The animosity should be talked about. Trade can be a good measure. One of the biggest reasons why India and China would not want to go in conflict against each other is the trade. China knows India is its biggest trading partner. India knows India is dependent on China for many reasons. So there won't be any trade. So there won't be any war if there won't, a trade would be going on. So trade could be a good option, and that's the reason why the idea of FTAs, the negotiations from the back door for tariff reductions have been taking place across the world. So let's see how this builds up, and this is something that I feel is going to be up for consideration in the growing times, that how should we balance the idea of nationalism while keeping in mind that an overall global peace should also be ensured in the world. Thank you.